Okay, so you want to own a gladiator school. Here's the fantasy running through your head right now. You buy some slaves, you hand them a couple of swords, you stroll up to your private box at the Colosseum, pour yourself a cup of wine, and sit back to watch your human property print money every single time one of them swings a blade. Blood goes in. Gold comes out. The perfect ancient investment. And before we take that fantasy apart piece by piece, because we absolutely are going to, do me one small favor. If you like history run through a calculator instead of read out of a storybook, hit subscribe right now. That is the only thing this channel does. We take the legends everybody thinks they know, and we ask one ruthless little question. What did it actually cost? Not the drama. The ledger. Do that, drop a like, and let's go ruin your fantasy together. Here's the problem with the picture I just painted. That image, the disposable spectacle, the throwaway men, the cheap and endless river of blood, is almost completely wrong. Not slightly wrong. Almost completely. The single biggest cost of running a gladiator school was not buying the men. It was not the weapons. It was not the armor. It was not even the fat bribes you paid to the politicians who ran the games and decided whose fighters got to perform. The single biggest cost of owning a gladiator school was, believe it or not, just keeping your assets alive and breathing from one week to the next. So let's talk about what it genuinely cost to own one of these places. The math. Before we build a single wall, we need a way to translate ancient money into money that means something to you today. Historians have a favorite trick for this. The cleanest way to compare ancient wages to modern ones is the daily pay of an unskilled laborer, a regular guy, no training, working with his hands from sunup to sundown. In Rome, that man earned roughly 1 denarius per day. Now, I want to be honest with you here, so we are going to use a round, generous, modern-day rate of about $120 to stand in for that denarius. It is not a precise economic conversion, and no serious historian would defend it down to the decimal. It is a storytelling tool, a way to feel the scale in numbers your gut already understands. 1 denarius, about $120. Keep it close, because we swing it around a lot. Now, here's the idea I need you to physically throw out of your head. Right now you are picturing the Ludus, the gladiator school, as a prison. A pit, a dark dungeon packed with chained, doomed men just waiting for their turn to die. It was nothing like that. A Ludus was far closer to a high-performance sports academy bolted directly onto a private hospital. And the man who owned it, the lanista, was not a grim butcher selling death by the pound. He was a talent manager selling a show. A profitable, repeatable, carefully protected show. If your fighter died in his very first match, your entire investment died in the dirt with him. Every coin you ever spent on that man, gone, soaked into the sand in about 4 seconds. So let's build one of these schools from scratch. And let's watch the money leave. Cost 1. Buying your roster. You would assume slaves were dirt cheap. Rome had millions of them flooding in from every conquered corner of the map. So how expensive could one human body really be? Here's the number, and historians piece it together from surviving records and price lists. A regular agricultural slave, someone to work a field or grind grain, cost you around 500 denarii. Reasonable. But a fresh recruit with the perfect body for the arena, young, tall, strong, symmetrical, undamaged, the kind of specimen a crowd actually wants to watch? That man was not 500 denarii. That man was closer to 4,000. Let's put it to scale, because one man is not a school. Say you want a real operation. 50 recruits, that is 200,000 denarii. Run it through our rate, and you have just spent $24 million. $480,000 per man before a single one of them has thrown a single punch. And here is the twist that should drop your stomach through the floor. You did not buy a finished product. Raw, unproven, untested potential. You just launched nearly $500,000 at a guy who might trip over his own feet and fall onto his own sword during his first week of training. No refund. No warranty. The sand does not give money back. You have the men. But raw talent wins nothing in the arena. So now the real costs begin. The staff. You would assume the training plan is simple and free. Hand each man a sword, point him at a wooden post, tell him to swing, and walk away. Not a chance. To turn raw bodies into valuable fighters, you needed a whole payroll of specialists. You needed doctors, the weapons coaches who taught technique and the specific style each fighter would perform in. You needed unctors, the men whose entire job was to massage and oil the fighters down. And most expensive of all, you needed a serious medical team. All in, this staff cost you somewhere around 10,000 denarii every single year. To scale, that is $1.2 million a year, just for the support staff. just to keep the machine oiled and running. And remember, at this point, not one single fight has even been scheduled. That is pure burn. And here's the twist. The medical care inside a gladiator school was better than what most free Roman citizens would ever get in their entire lives. Sit with how strange that is for a second. Enslaved fighters got better healthcare, better food, and better daily monitoring than the free, tax-paying men walking around outside the walls. Why? Not kindness. Because the last thing on earth you wanted was your $480,000 asset dropping dead from an infected scratch he picked up during a practice session. That is not mercy. That is asset protection. Plain and simple. And this is not just a theory. We have a name. We have a real man who proved it. Around the year 157 of the Common Era, a young, fiercely ambitious doctor named Galen took a job as the chief physician at a gladiator school out in the province of Asia. This was long before he became the most celebrated physician of the ancient world and the personal doctor to the Emperor Marcus Aurelius. At this point, he was a nobody, and this school was his first real break. And by his own account, the numbers he posted were staggering. He later claimed that in his years running the medical side of that school, thanks to a strict regimen of controlled diet, obsessive cleanliness, and careful wound care, only a small handful of his gladiators died, where under the physician before him, the deaths had run into the dozens. Now, plenty of historians suspect Galen polished that story to flatter himself, and we should take the exact figures with a healthy grain of salt. But the underlying point still holds, and every sharp lanista already knew it in his gut. A great doctor was not a medical expense. He was the ultimate financial shield, a living insurance policy wrapped around millions of dollars of walking, breathing property. Now, if you are still here with me, and if you are, seriously, drop the word hordearii down in the comments, because in about 30 seconds you will know exactly why. Let's take one quick breath. You have now seen where the baseline money goes. The bodies, the staff, the doctors. But we have not even touched the actual financial engine of this whole operation yet. And remember what I told you right at the start. This was never a slaughterhouse. It was a high-end sports agency, where the biggest risk was never losing a fight. The biggest risk was always losing the asset, because the one enormous bill that nobody in Rome could ever plan for was still on its way. Cost 3. Feeding them. You would assume gladiators ate scraps. Leftovers. Cold prison gruel scraped from the bottom of a pot. They were slaves after all, so who cares what they eat? Wrong. Gladiators had a nickname, and that nickname tells you the whole story. They were called hordearii, the barley men, the barley eaters. They were kept on a very deliberate, calorie-loaded, calcium-loaded diet. Mountains of barley, heaps of beans, and, this part is completely real, a tonic made from crushed bone ash mixed right into their food to strengthen the bones. Feeding 50 grown, heavily training men this way ran you around 5,500 denarii a year. To scale, that is $660,000 a year, spent purely on athlete nutrition. And now comes maybe the most twisted twist in this whole video, and the leading theory among historians for why gladiators were fattened up like this is genuinely unsettling. You were not stuffing them with all that barley to make them lean and shredded and cut like a modern fighter. You were feeding them to build up a thick, deliberate layer of fat sitting right under the skin. On purpose. Why on earth would you want your fighters a little bit chubby? Because of that exact fat layer. When a blade sliced a fighter open across the surface, he would bleed dramatically, spectacularly, a sheet of red pouring down for a screaming crowd, without the blade ever reaching the organs that actually keep a man alive. You were paying meal by meal, bowl of barley by bowl of barley, for what we might as well call cosmetic survivability. Blood for the audience. Life for your balance sheet. A wound that looked exactly like death and simply was not. Cost 4. Except this is the one where the money finally comes back in. You would assume you make your entire fortune by sending your guys out to fight to the death. Winner takes all, the bloodthirsty crowd paying handsomely for a pile of corpses. That is the whole business model, right? No. And this is the part that almost everybody gets completely backwards. You did not sell your gladiators. You rented them out. A politician or a wealthy official throwing games to buy public love and votes would come to you, the lanista, to lease your fighters for the day. A single fight that your man survived earned you a clean rental fee of around 1,000 denarii. That is $120,000 for one single afternoon of work. Beautiful money. But here is the clause that quietly ran the entire economy of the Roman arena. If your gladiator actually died out there in the sand, the man who rented him was legally on the hook to pay you the full replacement value of that fighter. And for a trained, proven, crowd-favorite star, that could run as high as 15,000 denarii. That is $1.8 million for one death. for one bad afternoon. Let me put that in terms you will feel in your bones. It was exactly like renting out a Ferrari for $10,000 a day. The renter gets one glorious day tearing around town. But the contract says that the very second he puts a single scratch on that car, he does not pay for the repair. He buys the entire car, on the spot, no negotiation, for $1.5 million. So here's the twist that flips the whole bloody legend right on its head. Yes, the crowd was screaming for death. But the two men who could actually decide life and death in that arena, you, the owner, and the sponsor footing the bill, desperately did not want anybody to die. A single death could bankrupt the sponsor and gut your entire roster in one afternoon. So the truth is that most fights simply did not end in death. Not because Rome was some gentle, tender place, because the insurance policy was just too brutally expensive to trigger. Mercy, it turns out, was mostly just very good accounting. So let's do the thing this channel exists to do. Let's add it all up. Let's total the bill for your first year running a top-tier gladiator school with 50 high-grade fighters. Buying your 50 recruits, 200,000 denarii, that is $24 million. Building the facility itself, the barracks, the training yard, the walls and the cells, 100,000 denarii. That is $12 million. Your medical and coaching staff, 10,000 denarii. That is $1.2 million. Weapons and armor for the whole school, 8,000 denarii. That is $960,000. Food and daily upkeep, 5,500 denarii. That is $660,000. Add every one of those together and your first-year bill lands at 323,500 denarii. In modern money, that is $38,820,000. Just to open the doors on year one. Let me put that number in perspective, 3 different ways so it really sinks in. That is more than it costs to buy your way into a modern franchised esports league. That is roughly what it costs to build an entire national Olympic training center from the ground up. And that single school's startup cost eats up more than half the entire annual economic output of the nation of Tuvalu, whose whole gross domestic product runs around $65 million a year. Sit with that. One school swallowing half of a sovereign country's economy. So here's the final punch, and this is the entire point of everything we just walked through. A gladiator school did not make you rich on blood. Owning one correctly, actually understanding the deep difference between a slaughterhouse and a sports academy, was the exact thing that separated the sharp lanistas who built real fortunes and lasting dynasties from the fools who bled out their savings one dead fighter at a time and went quietly, completely bankrupt in the sand. The blood was only ever the show. The real game, start to finish, was the balance sheet. If you want more history read through its math, subscribe. And next time, what it actually cost to run a medieval monastery, where the single biggest expense was not the monks, and it was not the land. It was the ink.